Chapter 7, Join the Dots. We've now explored a powerful set of tools which have great benefits individually. However, your goal here is to eliminate imposter syndrome, and the ultimate solution to that is to change the worth belief from conditional to unconditional. When you remove the fuel of conditional worth, the fire of imposter syndrome simply goes out. In this chapter, we combine these tools in a systematic way that maximizes the positive change you can create. We'll dive deeper into the neural mechanism of belief change, look at the individual emotion memories and their collective contribution to conditional worth, and then examine how to change to unconditional worth. Neurochemical secrets. While neuroscientists explored the brain's ability to change, neuroplasticity, it became clear that an adult's brain is less plastic or changeable than a baby's. This makes sense because the adult brain has a well-established internal model of the world that has proven its efficacy. If the adult brain had the plasticity of a young child's, a lifetime of essential learnings could easily be overwritten and precious information lost. This difference between child and adult brains is why many neuroscientists in the 1950s thought the adult brain to be fixed. This idea is echoed in the common saying, "You can't teach an old dog new tricks." Neuroplasticity in an adult's brain solves the problem of overwriting a good internal model by being selective, and only certain areas of the brain update. You can learn to scuba dive while on holiday, for example, whereas the ability to learn a new language with native fluency disappears after the age of 7. A key for neuroplasticity is the release of a neurochemical called acetylcholine, which signals to emotion memories to become receptive to change. Most areas of an adult's brain have a neurochemical inhibitor present that dampens the influence of acetylcholine and so prevents change. But certain areas don't have that inhibitor and so remain adaptable to change. One of these adaptable areas is the amygdala. This makes sense because throughout your life you encounter new dangers, which your amygdala needs to be able to learn about to continue to keep you safe. Thus, to change your amygdala response to dangers past and present, you need to release acetylcholine in the brain. This can be done via any of 3 mechanisms: relevance, surprise, and strong emotion. Relevance. Relevance means that the current situation is significant to your brain. That is, it's either a danger or a reward. When experimental rats learned a difficult maneuver to access a treat, for example, they remember it the next time and are faster at reaching the reward. However, if they were injected with an acetylcholine inhibitor, they didn't remember how to access the food, so were just as slow to reach it as they had been the first time. Similar experiments with mild electric shocks showed the same results, using pain rather than reward, and the memories could only be formed when the acetylcholine was present. It was the relevance of the pain or the reward to the rat survival that stimulated the brain to release acetylcholine. Surprise! The brain also releases acetylcholine in an unexpected situation. Recall that the brain needs to predict the future as well as possible, but a surprise is new information that doesn't match its predictions. This requires the internal model to be revised in case it's a danger or a reward situation to learn from. Thus, surprise releases acetylcholine and gives the amygdala the ability to modify the emotion memory. Similarly, strong emotions are an indication of potential danger or survival/social reward. Acetylcholine is released in the presence of these emotions, whether positive or negative. The amygdala will either change the emotion memory or it will reinforce it, depending on which emotions are experienced. Strong negative emotions, such as fear or anger, release stress neurochemicals of cortisol and adrenaline. The acetylcholine makes the emotion memory changeable, and if it's a fear memory, then the neurochemicals from strong negative emotions will reinforce or reconsolidate it, and no change will be made. Strong positive emotions release neurochemicals of serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, and oxytocin. These neurochemicals block the reconsolidation of the fear memory. That is, they result in changing the fear memory so that the amygdala no longer defines the situation as a threat. This cocktail of neurochemical appears to be the natural mechanism for the brain to continually refine its internal model in the amygdala. Like any savvy cocktail maker, we can concoct our own mix of neurochemicals to achieve our aim. We can deliberately stimulate acetylcholine to switch on change and then tune into specific emotions to guide the direction of that change. That is, these additional neurochemicals determine whether the fear memory is extinguished or enhanced. It gives us a powerful means to deliberately adjust the brain's automatic reaction to the events around us. The letting go process outlined in the last chapter was originally developed based on the combination of thousands of hours of coaching focused on conditional worth, with as many hours of neurofeedback targeting brain changes. These two approaches had been developed by trial and error without any knowledge of the mechanism that caused the positive results. The effectiveness of these two approaches can be explained by the understanding of the neurochemical interactions. That understanding was then used to further refine the letting go process by removing the steps that didn't have a neuroscience basis and adding in nuances. The resulting process, which is presented in this book, is consistently effective to permanently change individual emotion memories. Let's take a look at the letting go process from the viewpoint of these neurochemicals. The neurochemical dance. The carefully choreographed dance of the letting go process is a systematic way to create the right neurochemical environment to allow permanent emotion memory change in the amygdala. The first step is to choose a specific situation. This uses relevance to release acetylcholine. You're selecting an emotion memory with significance for you. That significance can be your desire to change this one emotion memory, or the understanding that this one step is taking you closer to your greater goal of eliminating imposter syndrome. Either way, it's important to you. When you decide to let go of the situation, this is more relevance because you're determined to make this change. You're focused on making a change that you see as beneficial. As you imagine charging the person with their actions, as in the courtroom, you bring more relevance by narrowing your attention to this one event. You've now taken 3 steps of relevance, each of which releases acetylcholine, priming your brain to change this emotion memory. However, if you are unmotivated, indifferent, or even half-hearted about this process, then it wouldn't register as relevant. This means that the acetylcholine would not be released, and so no change would occur. Thus, being motivated to do this work is required in order to make it effective. In the next step, you access the strong emotions that you had during the event, and these are negative emotions. If you continued to sit with these negative emotions, your system would release cortisol and adrenaline as you re-experience these feelings. This, in the presence of acetylcholine, would reconsolidate the fear memory and lock it in further. However, in letting go, you don't stay with a negative emotion for long. You just dip into them to create the greatest contrast with the positive emotions that will follow. You quickly find the gift and feel positive emotions for that. This rapid flip between negative and positive emotions creates surprise in the brain and releases even more acetylcholine. However, if you feel deeply into the positivity of the gift, you'll also engage strong emotions and make the change even more effective. To understand the other person is an intellectual step rather than an emotional one. However, it often leads to a sense of relief and a softening of the judgment towards that person, adding more positive emotions into the mix. The next step, to feel compassion, is absolutely generating strong emotion, specifically strong positive emotion. This releases more acetylcholine, while the positive emotions release neurochemicals such as serotonin and dopamine. These switch the amygdala's assessment of the situation from threat to non-threat. Finally, the celebrate step engages strong emotions again, having the same effect of before, but adding neurochemicals of endorphins and oxytocin, which generate feelings of calm, kindness, safety, and cooperation. Once you've finished letting go, you need to stop focusing on this situation and let it pass. Ideally, go and do something entirely different. This allows the neurochemicals to gently settle to background levels, effectively sealing the change in place. The change experienced is a completely permanent memory change. That is, the negative emotional charge of the emotion memory is dissipated. Recall James's surprised delight at how differently he felt about the situation after his first letting go. If you don't evoke enough compassion and positive emotion in the last steps, you may not get the complete transformation. Indeed, it's possible for people to have to repeat the same letting go a few times when they first learn the process, until they learn to generate strong enough compassion to complete the change. As they master the process, they get better and faster at it, and then once is enough to get the full transformation. Because this is a change in the amygdala, the new perspective of the event is at an unconscious level. That is, the change is not only permanent, but you don't have to continually remind yourself to think positively about the situation. It comes about effortlessly without your conscious attention. Up to this point, the letting go work has been to change the emotion memory of one isolated event. Next, we look at how we can use this powerful process strategically to target the belief of conditional worth. When the brain first develops its belief, it tests this belief in different situations, looking for proof that this is correct for the internal model. It updates the belief depending on what it finds, via the neurochemical interactions mentioned above. As the brain gets more proof from more confirming experience, the belief becomes more valid for the internal model. I see beliefs much like old-fashioned gobstopper or jawbreaker candies. These were small round cores with layers of coloured hard candy shell. The more layers, the larger the ball got. The result was solid and was too hard to crunch or bite. The only way to eat it was to dissolve the layers slowly. Confirming experiences. Similarly, a small core belief can have multiple layers of confirming experience. The more layers there are, the more the core belief is locked into place. That is, it's held to be true by the brain. Every new experience either confirms or contradicts the belief. For example, with the imposter behavior of deflecting praise, you assume others are wrong, mistaken, fooled, or after something when they praise you. You simply don't believe that you deserve the praise because it contradicts your brain's internal model that you're not good enough. Conditional worth has been seen as difficult to change because it's a deep-seated identity-level belief with a lifetime of confirming experiences. However, we now know that such change is possible, provided we use the right techniques. Unconditional worth can be described as having deep self-acceptance, where we're not judging or criticizing ourselves, but instead have understanding and compassion towards ourselves. However, the vast majority of us have instead held the conditional worth belief all our lives, which means we have many layers of experience that seem to confirm conditional worth. We can't just jump straight into having deep self-acceptance. The way to get there is to start small and to start with other people. That is, we first learn to accept others exactly as they are, warts and all, as the saying goes. We can achieve this deep acceptance only when the other person, their actions, and their history with us do not trigger our nervous system. That is, the amygdala ceases to react to them as a threat. Thus, the first step in developing our own unconditional worth is to change the amygdala's reaction to others, which is where letting go works so beautifully. After starting with letting go for others regarding small situations, we build up to more significant events, changing emotional memories one at a time. Memory association. Does this mean we have to work through a letting go process for every painful experience? Thankfully, no. Memories are stored by association in the brain, that is, groups of related events or ideas. This means that every time we let go of the emotional pain of one small event, the emotional pain of related events is released slightly too. A cluster of associated memories is like air filling a balloon. Release some of the air and the whole balloon gets smaller. In the same way, release one painful memory and the overall pain from this group of memories reduces. The number required to make a significant difference is surprisingly small. Doing the letting go process 15 to 20 times will create a massive shift. Because memories are associative, each letting go you complete chips away at your locked-in conditional worth belief. You choose small emotion memories that have formed the evidence of your conditional worth and let go for these, then slowly build to more significant memories. You must start with small emotions because you need to remain calm and in the fellow state throughout the process. If an emotion memory is too highly charged, too locked into your amygdala, then your nervous system will get triggered. Your brain cannot make positive changes in this state and the process will not be effective. If this happens, you need to get calm again and try with smaller, easier situations. Remember also that this process is unsuitable for significant trauma, PTSD, or mental illness without qualified help. Donna wanted to do some letting go regarding her ex-business partner as they were dissolving their partnership. She found she got too triggered when thinking of the big conflicts around client disputes and financial anomalies. She couldn't let go of the situation nor feel compassion towards her ex-business partner. She tried letting go for a small event, but that was also too hard, so she instead focused on a tiny iteration. He would frequently forget to save his expenses receipts. It had exasperated her throughout their partnership and had created unnecessary workload. This situation, however, was small enough that she could let it go all the way to compassion. Once she let go of the receipts issue, then it was easy for Donna to step up progressively to larger disagreements until she could fully let go of the biggest disputes. As you do this work, you naturally start to apply the freedom framework we looked at in Chapter 5 to all people you interact with. You become more accepting of them. You're not condoning their actions, but you are accepting that they're human, can make mistakes, and are doing the best they can. Develop unconditional worth. In doing this letting go work, you begin to realize that one person's worth is unconditional. As you do it for more and more people, you start to see that everybody's worth is unconditional. You're connecting with the essential equality of all humans. This alone is an amazing shift. It changes how you interact with everyone around you. You feel calmer and more resilient, regardless of how other people behave. This reduces other people's influence on how you think of yourself in the face of their disapproval or approval. You now see their negative opinions as an expression of their pain and having nothing to do with your worth. As a result, you feel more confident that you can handle whatever comes your way. Now you're ready to move on and let go of your judgment and criticism of yourself. You use exactly the same letting go process, but imagine yourself as the accused. You charge yourself with actions that you have judged, blamed, and criticized yourself for. Again, you start with the small events and build to larger ones. You are smoothly unraveling all of the inputs to your belief of being less than fully worthy. You gradually develop deep self-acceptance and compassion for yourself. Finally, you start to feel good enough and a solid sense of your own unconditional worth emerges. James followed the letting go process to the letter. He started with small irritations that still bothered him, the stranger who'd keyed his car, the supplier who'd missed their promised deadline, the neighbour who built a house extension that put James's garden in the shadow, and more. These small events familiarized him with the process and gave him confidence with following it. James moved on to more significant situations, the ridiculous argument with his brother 8 years ago, one teacher's hurtful comment in school, and the ex-colleague who undermined him in front of the boss. As he let go and forgave each one, James felt lighter every time. Things from his past that had haunted him for years were released, relaxed, and soothed one by one. Then James came to an event he thought impossible to let go of when he first started this work. In James's first executive role, his position had also been new and the scope of his work was still being defined. One colleague, Brian, seemed unhappy with James's appointment and kept trying to step in and take over, even though Brian would not have been able to take on James's work too. There was simply too much to be done. Brian was also a bully who frequently argued with and criticised James. In James's first executive planning meeting with his 11 colleagues and the CEO, he was outlining his work and plans for the year ahead when Brian interrupted. He picked apart James's presentation, accused him of missing the most vital part, and verbally attacked him, calling him an idiot who should have never been hired. Mortified, James looked at his CEO, Sean, who'd already approved those plans. But Sean said nothing and looked away. James turned to the 3 colleagues who he'd become friends with, but they too stayed silent. Another colleague took Brian's side and argued for a redefinition of the role. No one stepped in to back up James. James felt shocked, betrayed, confused, and alone. He quit soon after and found himself a better position with a supportive boss and peers. However, the pain, humiliation, and anger stayed with James whenever he thought about that occasion. Even years later, this old event made him second-guess himself and hold back from putting forward ideas. It made him less willing to trust others too. It also explains why James was so shaken by his current boss's criticism, which we saw in Chapter 2, triggering the freeze state. It was an echo of this past event. James started letting go for Sean, the CEO, for not stepping in and correcting Brian. He now understood that Sean's survival strategy was praise and approval, and that he tended to avoid conflict. James realized that Sean had never been able to handle Brian very well, and clearly had felt helpless. Sean also seemed to take a lot of time off, likely running from what must have seemed to be an impossible situation. James felt compassion for him and saw that Sean didn't have the knowledge or skills to handle Brian. Sean's inability to intervene in the planning meeting wasn't about James. It was not personal, and it had nothing to do with James's work. Then James let go for his colleagues who didn't speak up and support him. Looking back, he remembered how shocked they had appeared. They were also intimidated by Brian's outburst and didn't want to be targets themselves. Recalling comments they'd made before, James saw that they had been bullied by Brian in the past too. He also realised that they hadn't known enough details to know who was right either, so they had no strong grounds to back him up. James understood their difficult position and that their inaction was about them, not him, and he felt compassion for their position. Next, James came to letting go for Brian's attack in that meeting. James saw that bullying to get his way was the only tool that Brian had when dealing with people. He had a reputation for being difficult to work with, which isolated him in the company and meant he had very little support. So Brian would have been feeling vulnerable and unable to use his typical power survival strategy. When Brian felt isolated and helpless, then his compensating behaviour was to attack. No wonder he went after James in such a public way. When James saw that Brian's attack was not about him, but about Brian, he started to feel sorry for Brian for having such limited ways of interacting. James realised that if Brian had known a more effective way to feel included, supported and strong, then he would have used it. Lastly, James forgave himself for his own behaviour, what he had said and not said, and for quitting, which he had previously felt ashamed of and branded himself a failure for. James accepted that he had done the best that he could at the time. He stopped feeling like a victim and instead viewed himself with compassion and acceptance. Breaking down this big, significant, distressing experience into smaller experiences and letting go for each one individually turned it around completely for James. He no longer felt anxious or angry when he thought about it. He no longer took it personally, as he could see that this was a group of people doing their best to deal with a high-stress situation. James had finally forgiven Sean, his ex-colleagues, Brian, and himself. This event no longer defined him and his behaviour, and he was free from his influence at last. Letting go of this situation and several others related to conditional worth meant James started to accept himself and to feel unconditionally worthy. From here, he became more comfortable stepping into the spotlight. He seized opportunities rather than avoid risks. He spoke up, expressing his thoughts and ideas. It was effortless confidence and forgetting to doubt himself. He felt excited to make a contribution and lead in the way that he always hoped he could lead. This is not therapy. Although the letting go for these situations is significant and therapeutic, it's not therapy. Neuroscientists call therapy cognitive reappraisal. That is, to become aware of the specific painful events or relationships and reframe how you consciously think about them. Therapy is also designed to help people move from mental dysfunction to normal functioning, but that's not our focus here. By contrast, neuroscientists would call the process of change used in letting go blocking the reconsolidation of specific emotion memories. That is, creating a permanent shift using the innate brain mechanisms that update the amygdala and changes what is considered to be a threat at the unconscious level. As a step further, the work presented here targets the unconscious conditional worth beliefs stored in the amygdala by letting go for a collection of emotion memories. The aim is not to resolve one painful situation, but rather to systematically resolve a series of events, using them as stepping stones that altogether resolve the conditional worth belief. This is an important distinction, as each letting go from the very smallest is a crucial step in our overall goal. Each letting go has relevance to the overall process, and so the brain releases the acetylcholine that makes the change possible. Imagine trying to lift 100-kilogram weights at the gym. You start with 5 kilograms to learn how to lift correctly and safely. Then you progress to heavier weights until you reach your goal. You don't mind starting small with 5-kilogram weights because this is important to the process, and you'd injure yourself if you went straight to the heaviest ones. However, if you didn't have the goal to lift the heavier weights, then you'd be unlikely to want to lift 5-kilogram weights all the time. There'd be little gain and therefore no relevance, which means you'd struggle to find the motivation. In the same way, you need to learn the letting go process for minor situations. If you were to start on more difficult situations, which would trigger your nervous system, and like a muscle injury, it would hinder your progress. However, merely letting go for one minor situation would not make a big enough change in your life to motivate you to do it. It would not have enough relevance for you to release acetylcholine. Thus, a smaller letting go is practice and skill development for the larger ones. And the ultimate goal is to change from conditional to unconditional worth, so as to finally eliminate imposter syndrome. This goal gives you a great reason to do even the smallest letting go. Although elements of letting go are seen in lots of therapeutic approaches, it is its systematic application towards the specific goal of unconditional worth that sets this process apart. As you release the emotional charge regarding the events that previously confirmed conditional worth, your brain has less and less evidence that the belief is true. In fact, the process links positive emotions that confirm unconditional worth instead. As you apply the process further, your brain receives more and more evidence that unconditional worth is true for other people. This allows you to feel a deep level of acceptance for others. You then progress to developing your own unconditional worth and a deep self-acceptance. Regardless of situations around you, you have finally separated your actions from your worth. Emotional intelligence. When you master letting go like this, you naturally develop high emotional intelligence, as you are able to separate a person's action from their worth as a human being. This automatically raises your respect and tolerance for other people without you even thinking about it. It carries over to all your relationships and benefits them immensely. You understand why people do the ugly, hurtful, clumsy, or accidental things that they do. And you understand that it's the same driver for all of us. You stop feeling like a victim blown around like a wee leaf in the wind by other people's behavior and opinions. When you can see their humanity and all their flaws, that sets you free. You can even find yourself going through the process in real time while you're in the middle of a difficult situation. This means you can clear the past, deal gracefully with the current difficulties, and have confidence that you can handle further difficulties too. Close the loop. Let's come full circle back to outsmarting imposter syndrome and eliminating it for good. All the elements covered in this book are essential, as is the order in which they're done, because it's a systematic process rather than a list of techniques. You first learned the neuroregulation tools to calm your nervous system and access the fellow state. This means that you're able to reset yourself back to the fellow state whenever you get triggered. You also learned how to manage your time and energy in your work and personal life so that fewer situations activate your nervous system. Thus, you're able to handle the day-to-day challenges with greater ease. Then you developed a plan to relax the imposter behaviors. This is all managing imposter syndrome and breaking the cycle of its symptoms. Next, in working through the letting go process multiple times for specific events, you have removed the threat triggers from your amygdala. This allows you to remain calmly detached yet fully present in the face of situations that previously had triggered you. This happens at an entirely unconscious level, which makes it automatic and effortless. You have developed unconscious neuroregulation. That is, you don't have to actively think about it. In this way, the physiological stress symptom of imposter syndrome melts away and you become more consistently calm and in the high performance fellow state. When you feel calmer in this way, your impulse to engage in imposter behaviors is reduced significantly. The fuel to these fires is gone and you no longer need these coping patterns. Even if you still experienced a residual habit of these behaviors, your newfound levels of self-acceptance means that you won't beat yourself up, criticize, or judge yourself for it. Instead, you understand and feel compassion for yourself. Free from that self-judgment, you can quickly course correct. The gradual exposure process from chapter 4 now works exceptionally well for you to retrain yourself out of the habit of those behaviors. Finally, the imposter syndrome thinking has flipped entirely. You've gone from automatic self-criticism to automatic self-acceptance. That is, you've achieved unconditional worth. You're not trying to talk yourself into thinking positively. You just do it effortlessly. You've forgotten to doubt yourself, and a solid sense of your comfort, confidence, and belonging blossoms. From here, you shift the way in which you lead and mentor others at work. The basis for your leadership has become good neuroregulation, high emotional intelligence, and a natural respect for and acceptance of yourself and others. Let's look now at how unconditional worth naturally changes the way that you lead.